I don't touch that box." The words cut through the warehouse floor like a blade, but Haley Adams had already lifted container 2-4, her calloused fingers, detecting something that made her heart skip. The weight was wrong. After 3 years of handling identical AI chip shipments, she knew this one felt different. "I said don't touch it." Vera Lang's voice sharpened as she clicked across the concrete floor. "That container goes out in 4 hours." But Haley couldn't let go. Not when every instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. At 25, she'd earned a reputation as the shy girl who never spoke up in meetings, never challenged authority, never caused trouble. Growing up in Kentucky coal country, where silence often meant survival, she'd learned early that keeping your head down meant keeping your job. Her father had worked the mines for 30 years, coming home each night with coal dust in his lungs and stories about men who died because someone didn't speak up about a dangerous situation. "Pay attention to what others miss, honey," he'd told her countless times. "That's how you stay alive. That's how you protect the people around you." Tonight, that wisdom was screaming. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the vast warehouse floor where millions of dollars of technology moved through human hands every night. Haley had become part of this machinery, her movements precise and efficient, her attention to detail legendary among the night shift workers who knew her as the quiet one who never missed anything. "The weight distribution is off," Haley said quietly, her voice barely audible over the hum of conveyor belts. "This doesn't feel like the Series 7X processors." Vera's eyes flashed with irritation. She'd been hoping to finish her efficiency reports early tonight, and any delay would reflect poorly on her quarterly performance metrics. "You're a packer, not quality control. Your job is to seal and ship, not to question what's already been approved by management." Earl Bennett, the 64-year-old forklift operator who'd become her mentor, rolled closer on his well-worn machine, his weathered face creased with concern as he watched the confrontation unfold. In 37 years of warehouse work, he'd seen enough workplace disasters to know when trouble was brewing. The shy girl from Kentucky had never steered him wrong before. "What's wrong, child?" he asked Haley, his voice gentle but concerned. "Go in this container." She lifted it again, feeling the subtle shift in weight that others would miss. Her hands had memorized the exact specifications of these shipments through countless repetitions. "I've packed 212 of these exact shipments. This one's different." Earl's eyes narrowed. He'd taught the shy girl from Kentucky how to read shipping codes, how to spot inconsistencies, how to trust her hands when her eyes couldn't tell the difference. She'd been his best student, absorbing decades of his experience with quiet intensity. "Different how?" he asked, knowing that when Haley Adams said something was wrong, it usually was. "The components inside are heavier. The balance is wrong." She set the container down and reached for the sealing tape. "I need to check the contents." "Absolutely not." Vera stepped between Haley and the container, her MBA training kicking in with corporate efficiency. "Mr. Voss personally approved this shipment. It's going to Dubai on the 6 a.m. flight, and we are not going to be responsible for a delay." Nick Voss emerged from the shadows, his management badge catching the fluorescent light. At 38, he'd built his career on meeting deadlines and avoiding complications. His office walls were covered with awards for on-time delivery, but none for accuracy or safety. "What's the problem here?" "Adams is questioning an approved shipment," Vera explained with barely concealed frustration. "I've told her to seal it and move on." Nick's gaze shifted to Haley, and she saw something that chilled her. The look of someone who knew exactly what was in that container and hoped no one would ever find out. "The box doesn't feel right." Haley said, her voice steadier now. Something's wrong with the contents. We don't ship based on feelings, Nick replied with a forced laugh. We ship based on documentation. And according to the paperwork, this container is ready to go. But Haley had already made her decision. The shy girl who'd never challenged authority, who'd always followed orders without question, reached for the container seal. Something in her father's voice echoed in her mind. When you see something wrong, speaking up isn't about being brave. It's about being responsible. I'm sorry, but I need to verify the contents. You're not authorized. I'm not shipping something that feels wrong. She interrupted, her voice carrying a conviction that surprised everyone, including herself. Not when my name is on the verification form. The warehouse fell silent except for the distant hum of machinery. In that moment, none of them knew that Haley Adams, the quiet worker who'd always blended into the background, was about to prevent a disaster that would have destroyed everything they'd built. She opened the box. The contents stared back at Haley like evidence of a crime she'd stumbled upon by accident. Instead of the familiar gunmetal gray Series 7X processors, she found components bearing bright red classification stickers, the unmistakable mark of restricted technology that was never supposed to leave the building. Sweet Jesus. Earl whispered, his face pale as he recognized the implications. These are the prototype units from the secure section. Haley's hands trembled as she lifted one of the components. The security briefing from her first day echoed in her memory with crystalline clarity. Red classification stickers meant controlled technology forbidden from export under federal law. Components that required special clearance, special handling, special everything. Someone had replaced the approved processors with prototypes that could land them all in federal prison. I don't understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. How did these get here? Her mind raced through the possibilities. The secure section required badge access, camera surveillance, and dual authorization for any component removal. These weren't supposed to exist anywhere near the export warehouse, let alone packed in a container bound for Dubai. Vera's face had gone white, but her voice remained sharp with denial. Put it back. Seal the container. This is not our problem. Not our problem. Earl's weathered hands gestured at the restricted components, his voice rising with disbelief. Do you know what happens if these go to Dubai? If they end up in the wrong hands, this company will be finished. Hell will all be finished. Nick Voss stepped forward, his earlier confidence replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. The sweat on his forehead betrayed his calm exterior. Look, there's obviously been some kind of mix-up in the tech department, but we can't delay this shipment. The Dubai contract is worth millions. And this violation could cost us everything, Haley replied. The shy girl who'd never spoken up before found her voice growing stronger with each word. I've seen what happens when people ignore problems they don't want to deal with. My father died because mine supervisors ignored safety reports that didn't fit their production schedules. She could still remember the funeral, the company representatives who'd spoken about acceptable risks and unavoidable accidents. Her father's black lung disease had been within acceptable parameters until the day it killed him. This is different. Vera insisted, her MBA training kicking in with corporate doublespeak. This is just a paperwork issue, a mislabeled container. We can sort it out after delivery. No, Haley said firmly, carefully documenting each component as she repacked them. Her handwriting was precise, methodical, as she noted serial numbers, classification levels, and discrepancies. This is a federal crime, and I won't be part of it. She thought about her father's words. When you see something wrong, you don't look the other way. You don't pass it up the chain. You deal with it right then and there. The shy girl from Kentucky wrote on her verification form in careful, deliberate handwriting. Manual verified, HA. Contents do not match manifest. Restricted technology identified. Shipment rejected. Nick's face flushed red with anger and desperation. You don't have the authority to reject an approved shipment. Do you have any idea what this delay will cost us? I have the authority to refuse to ship something that's wrong. Haley replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. And this is wrong. This is as wrong as anything I've ever seen in 3 years of working here. The confrontation escalated quickly. Vera threatened to write her up for insubordination, to have her transferred to day shift, where she'd be under constant supervision. Nick threatened to have her fired for interfering with approved operations. But Earl stepped between them and the shy girl who'd found her courage. You touch her, and you'll answer to me. The old man said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of 37 years of warehouse experience. She's doing what's right, which is more than I can say for either of you. As the argument continued, Haley worked methodically to secure the container. She sealed it with her verification tape, marked it clearly with the rejection code, and moved it to the hold area where questionable shipments awaited further review. Her movements were calm and purposeful, despite the chaos erupting around her. This shipment goes nowhere until someone from senior management explains how restricted technology ended up in an export container. She said, her voice cutting through the arguing voices. You've just cost us the Dubai contract. Vera hissed, her quarterly performance metrics flashing before her eyes. I've just saved us from a federal investigation. Haley replied, thinking of her father's stories about men who died because someone had been more worried about production quotas than safety protocols. The warehouse around them continued its late-night rhythm, oblivious to the drama unfolding in one small corner. Other workers moved through their tasks, unaware that their quiet colleague was making a decision that would change everything for everyone. Do you have any idea what you've done? Nick demanded, his voice rising with desperation. The client is expecting this shipment. We have contracts, deadlines, commitments. I know what I've prevented, Haley said quietly. I've prevented this company from committing a federal crime. I've prevented good people from going to prison. And I've prevented us from destroying something that took years to build. The shy girl from Kentucky looked around at the faces surrounding her. Vera's anger, Nick's panic, Earl's pride. She realized that sometimes the most important decisions aren't made in boardrooms or executive offices. Sometimes they're made by ordinary people who care enough to pay attention and brave enough to act. The night shift ended with the container still in hold, its contents documented and secured. Haley went home to her small apartment, unaware that she'd just prevented a catastrophe that would have destroyed not just her job, but the entire company and the lives of everyone who worked there. She slept fitfully, dreaming of her father's voice. You did right, honey. You did right. The next morning, everything changed. At 8:23 a.m., Logan Pierce received the call that would haunt him for months. The Dubai client had performed a routine customs inspection and discovered that their previous shipment from Orion Dynamics, a shipment that had been processed the week before, contained restricted technology that violated export regulations. How is this possible? Logan demanded, his voice shaking with fury and fear. His coffee cup sat forgotten on his desk as the implications crashed over him like a tsunami. Sir, the customs officials say they've notified the Department of Commerce. We're facing a federal investigation. The client is threatening to cancel all future contracts. Logan's blood ran cold. The 2021 lawsuit that had nearly destroyed his company was nothing compared to this. Export violations carried criminal penalties, massive fines, and the complete destruction of everything he'd built over 20 years. Get me the shipping records for the past month. I want to know how restricted technology got into an export shipment. And I want to know now. The investigation that followed was swift and merciless. Within hours, Logan discovered that the previous week's shipment had gone through without proper verification. Nick Voss had signed off on it, despite obvious discrepancies. Vera Lang had actively discouraged workers from questioning approved shipments. But then they found something else in the records, a container from the current week that had been flagged and rejected by a warehouse worker. Container Zucker 6 Sesamas Dedan24 marked Manual Verified HA. Contents do not match manifest. Who is HA? Logan asked his security chief, his voice tight with controlled tension. Haley Adams, night shift warehouse worker. She's been with us for 3 years. No disciplinary actions, excellent performance reviews. Logan studied the documentation with growing amazement. While his managers had been allowing restricted technology to slip through their fingers, the shy girl from Kentucky had been the only one paying attention. She'd identified the problem, documented it properly, and refused to let it continue. Bring me everyone who was involved with this shipment, Logan ordered. And I want to meet this Haley Adams. The conference room had never felt more like a courtroom. Logan Pierce sat at the head of the mahogany table, flanked by his legal team and the company's head of security. The evidence spread before them painted a picture of systematic negligence that had brought them to the brink of federal prosecution. Ladies and gentlemen, Logan began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd just realized how close his company had come to complete destruction. We are facing a federal investigation that could result in criminal charges, massive fines, and the end of Orion Dynamics as we know it. The assembled warehouse management team shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher than usual, casting stark shadows across faces that had gone pale with the realization of what they were facing. Vera Lang sat rigid, her face a mask of barely controlled panic. Nick Voss avoided eye contact, his earlier confidence replaced by obvious terror. Shute Josiu, last week's shipment to Dubai, contained restricted prototype technology. Logan continued, his voice growing sharper with each word. The Department of Commerce has been notified? We're looking at potential violations of the Export Administration regulations, which carry penalties of up to $1 million per violation and up to 20 years in prison. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of the warehouse continuing its operations. Outside the windows, the city continued its normal rhythm, oblivious to the crisis unfolding in the corporate headquarters. But, Logan continued, his voice taking on a different tone, we're also looking at evidence that someone tried to prevent this disaster. Someone who caught a similar shipment this week and refused to let it go through. He gestured to the documentation spread across the table like evidence in a trial. Containers Subber 6 and 724 was flagged by a warehouse worker who identified restricted technology in an export shipment. While our management was signing off on federal crimes, this worker was doing her job. Earl Bennett called in from the warehouse floor, and looking uncomfortable in his work clothes among the suited executives, cleared his throat. That would be Haley Adams, sir. She's been trying to tell people about problems with the shipping protocols, but nobody listens to warehouse workers. Nobody listens, Logan repeated slowly, his voice heavy with irony. We have managers who signed off on federal violations, and we have a warehouse worker who prevented them. Tell me, Mr. Bennett, why didn't Miss Adams come forward sooner? Earl's weathered face showed a hint of anger that surprised everyone in the room. Because she's a shy girl, sir. She's been taught that her job is to follow orders, not question them. She's been told that warehouse workers don't have opinions, they have tasks. But when she saw something that could hurt the company, she found her courage. "Bring her in," Logan ordered. When Haley entered the conference room, Logan was struck by how small she seemed among the executives and managers. The shy girl from Kentucky who'd prevented a federal disaster looked like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Her work uniform stood out starkly against the business suits surrounding her. "Miss Adams," Logan said gently, recognizing that he was speaking to someone who had potentially saved his company. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened with container 67724. Haley's voice was quiet but steady, her Kentucky accent more pronounced under stress. "The weight was wrong, sir. I've packed hundreds of these shipments, and this one felt different. When I opened it, I found restricted components that didn't match the manifest." "And what did you do?" Logan leaned forward, genuinely interested in her answer. "I documented everything and refused to ship it. I knew it was wrong, and I couldn't let it go through. My father always said that when you see something wrong, you don't look the other way." Logan studied her face, seeing the integrity that had saved his company. "Miss Adams, you're aware that similar shipments had been going through for weeks. I suspected something was wrong," she admitted. "But I'm just a warehouse worker. I didn't think anyone would listen to me." "And yet you acted anyway." "Yes, sir. Because it was the right thing to do. Because sometimes being a shy girl doesn't mean staying silent about things that matter." Logan turned to Nick Voss, his voice becoming cold and precise. "Mr. Voss, can you explain why you signed off on shipments that contained restricted technology?" Nick's face was flushed red with embarrassment and fear. "The tech department assured me that all components were export approved. I trusted their documentation. I didn't think I needed to verify every single component." "Did you physically verify the contents?" Logan pressed. "That's not my job," Nick replied defensively. "I manage logistics, not technical specifications." "Miss Adams managed to identify the problem," Logan said with deadly calm. "A warehouse worker with no management training identified a problem that could have destroyed this company. Why couldn't you?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Logan turned to Vera Lang, his disappointment evident. "Miss Lang, can you explain why you discouraged workers from questioning approved shipments?" Vera's voice was barely audible. "We have deadlines to meet. We can't second-guess every decision that comes down from management. The efficiency metrics. Even when those decisions could result in federal prosecution," Logan interrupted. "We didn't know the implications," Vera said weakly. "Miss Adams knew," Logan said, his voice carrying the weight of judgment. "A shy girl from Kentucky with no formal training identified a problem that could have destroyed this company. While you were worried about efficiency metrics, she was protecting our future." He stood up, his authority filling the room. "The federal investigation is ongoing, but because of Miss Adams's intervention, we can demonstrate that we have internal controls in place. Her documentation shows that we identified and stopped the violation before it could cause further damage." Logan looked directly at Haley, his respect evident in every word. "Miss Adams, your actions may have saved this company from complete destruction. You prevented a federal crime, protected hundreds of jobs, and demonstrated the kind of integrity that we need at every level of this organization." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The shy girl who'd never spoken up before had been the only one paying attention when it mattered most. In a room full of executives and managers, the person with the least authority had shown the most leadership. "I have some decisions to make," Logan announced. "This meeting is adjourned." As the executives filed out, Logan asked Haley to stay behind. When they were alone, he looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. You know, Miss Adams, I've been running this company for 20 years. I've hired MBAs from the best schools, consultants from the top firms, managers with decades of experience. And in the end, it was a shy girl from Kentucky who saved us all. Haley shifted uncomfortably. I just did what felt right, sir. That's exactly the point, Logan said. When everyone else was following procedures, you were following your conscience. That's real leadership. The shy girl from Kentucky had found her voice, and in doing so, she'd saved them all. The transformation began immediately. Within 48 hours, Nick Voss and Vera Lang were terminated for gross negligence. The federal investigation continued, but Logan's lawyers were able to demonstrate that Orion Dynamics had robust internal controls that had prevented the violation from continuing. The Department of Commerce investigators were particularly impressed by Haley's documentation. Her careful notes, her rejection of the shipment, and her willingness to stand up to management showed that the company had employees who took compliance seriously. This is exactly the kind of internal vigilance we want to see, the lead investigator told Logan during their meeting. Your workers' actions demonstrate that your company has a culture of integrity, even if it wasn't properly supported by management. Logan knew better. The company had been minutes away from disaster, saved only by the courage of a shy girl who'd been taught that her voice didn't matter. He was determined to change that culture permanently. Miss Adams, he said during their private meeting in his office, I want to offer you a position as our new Director of Quality Assurance. Haley's eyes widened with surprise and uncertainty. Sir, I'm not qualified for a management position. I'm just a warehouse worker. I don't have a degree or management experience. You're the most qualified person in this company, Logan replied firmly. You understood the products, recognized the problem, and had the courage to act. That's exactly what we need in leadership. But I'm just a shy girl from Kentucky, she protested. I don't have an MBA or management training. I don't know how to run meetings or make presentations. You have something more valuable than any degree, Logan said, his voice carrying deep conviction. You have integrity and the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult. That's the kind of leadership this company needs. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the warehouse floor where it all began. Do you know what I learned from this crisis? That all the MBAs and management consultants in the world can't replace someone who actually cares about doing the right thing? Haley accepted the position, but insisted on starting slowly. She began by developing training programs for warehouse workers, teaching them to trust their instincts and speak up when something seemed wrong. Her first class was small, just 12 workers who'd volunteered to stay after their shift to learn from the shy girl who'd saved their jobs. You don't need a title to protect something you care about, she told them, her voice growing stronger with each word. I was just a shy girl who didn't want to see people get hurt. But sometimes that's enough. Her approach was revolutionary. Instead of corporate buzzwords and management theory, she taught practical skills: how to recognize discrepancies, how to document problems, how to speak up to authority figures without being confrontational. The key, she explained, is to focus on the problem, not the person. Don't say, "You're wrong." Say, "Something doesn't look right." Don't make accusations, make observations. Earl Bennett, now serving as her mentor in reverse, helped her develop the confidence to lead. You've always had it in you, he told her during one of their regular conversations. You just needed to find your voice. The training programs were revolutionary. For the first time in the company's history, warehouse workers were encouraged to question procedures, report problems, and trust their expertise. The results were immediate and dramatic. Within 6 months, the warehouse staff had identified dozens of potential problems that had been overlooked by management. A forklift operator caught a mislabeled chemical shipment that could have caused an environmental disaster. A night shift supervisor identified a security breach that could have compromised client data. A young packer noticed that a container felt too light and discovered that expensive components had been stolen during transit. It's like we suddenly have hundreds of quality control specialists, Logan told his board of directors during their quarterly meeting. And the best part is, they're not additional employees. They're the same people who were always there. We just started listening to them. The Dubai contract was eventually fulfilled, but with enhanced procedures that became the new standard. The client was so impressed with the quality improvements that they expanded their order and referred other companies to Orion Dynamics. Word spread through the industry about the company that had transformed its quality control by empowering frontline workers. You know what the most interesting part is? Logan told his board of directors during their quarterly meeting. Our best quality control officer is a shy girl from Kentucky who never wanted to be in management. She just wanted to do the right thing. The board members nodded respectfully. They'd all seen the metrics. Since Haley's promotion, quality issues had decreased by 87%, customer satisfaction had increased by 94%, and the company's reputation had never been stronger. But for Haley, the real success was in the emails she received from workers across the company. People who had found their voices, who had spoken up about problems, who had chosen integrity over convenience. Each message reminded her that sometimes the most important changes happen one person at a time. I used to be invisible, she told Logan during one of their weekly meetings. I thought being a shy girl meant I didn't matter. But I learned that sometimes the quietest voices have the most important things to say. A year later, Logan stood before the entire company at their annual meeting. The auditorium was packed with employees from every level of the organization, from senior executives to new hires. The culture had changed so dramatically that many attendees were warehouse workers who'd never before felt comfortable attending company meetings. Excellence isn't about having the right title or the right degree, he concluded, his eyes finding Haley in the audience. It's about having the courage to do what's right. A shy girl from Kentucky taught us that lesson, and it saved our company. In the audience, Haley listened with quiet satisfaction. She'd learned that courage doesn't require being loud or aggressive. Sometimes it just requires being willing to stand up for what you believe in, even when you're afraid. The shy girl from Kentucky had found her voice, and in doing so, she'd transformed not just her own life, but the lives of everyone around her. 2 years after the incident that changed everything, Haley Adams stood before a packed auditorium at the National Quality Control Conference. The shy girl from Kentucky, who'd once been afraid to speak up in small meetings, was now addressing industry leaders from around the world. I want to tell you about a night when I almost made the biggest mistake of my life. She began, her voice clear and confident. I almost let a container go through because I was afraid to question authority. The audience of 600 industry professionals leaned forward, captivated by her story. Here was someone who'd lived through the kind of crisis they all feared, someone who'd found a way to prevent disaster through sheer courage and integrity. I was taught that being a shy girl meant keeping quiet, following orders, and not making waves. But that night, I learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is trust your instincts and speak up even when you're scared. She gestured to a slide showing container 24, now famous in quality control circles as the shipment that changed an entire industry's approach to employee empowerment. This box contained restricted technology that could have destroyed my company and put people in prison. The only thing that stopped it was a warehouse worker who was willing to say, "This doesn't feel right." The transformation in Haley's confidence was remarkable, but she hadn't lost the qualities that made her exceptional. She still listened more than she spoke, still paid attention to details others missed, still believed that doing the right thing was more important than being popular. People ask me how a shy girl from Kentucky became a director at a major corporation. She continued, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who'd learned hard lessons. The answer is simple. I stopped apologizing for caring about quality and started trusting my expertise. Her programs had been implemented in over 300 companies across the country. The Haley Adams method of quality control emphasized employee empowerment, instinct-based verification, and the courage to speak up when something was wrong. The most dangerous words in any workplace are, "That's not my job," she told the audience. Every person in your organization has the responsibility to protect what you've built together. Whether you're a CEO or a night shift worker, you have the power to prevent disaster. Earl Bennett, now 70 and officially retired, watched from the front row with pride that brought tears to his eyes. The shy girl he'd mentored had become a leader who inspired others to find their own voices. She taught me that you don't need to be loud to be powerful, he'd told reporters earlier that day. Sometimes the most important changes come from the quietest voices. That girl saved our company not by shouting, but by caring enough to pay attention. Logan Pierce, also in the audience, reflected on how much his company had changed. The culture of fear and blind obedience had been replaced by one of empowerment and integrity. Workers at every level felt valued and heard. Haley saved us from more than a federal investigation, he'd told the conference organizers. She saved us from becoming a company that valued compliance over conscience. She taught us that real leadership isn't about having the right title. It's about having the courage to do what's right. The financial impact had been extraordinary. The company's stock price had tripled, quality certifications had increased by 400%, and customer retention was at an all-time high. Insurance companies offered premium discounts specifically because of their quality control reputation. But the real measure of success was in the culture change. The shy girl from Kentucky had created an environment where every employee felt empowered to speak up, to question procedures, and to trust their instincts. "I still get nervous before speaking," Haley admitted to the audience with a self-deprecating smile. "I'm still that shy girl from Kentucky who'd rather work quietly than be the center of attention. But I've learned that being shy doesn't mean being silent when something important is at stake." She paused, looking out at the faces of men and women who'd traveled from around the world to hear her story. "I want to share something my father told me before he died. He said, 'Honey, courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about caring so much about something that you're willing to be afraid for it.' That night in the warehouse, I was terrified. But I cared more about doing the right thing than I cared about being comfortable." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. "Here's what I learned. You don't need a title to protect something you believe in. You don't need permission to do what's right. Sometimes all you need is the courage to trust what you know and act on it." She concluded her speech with the words that had become her signature. "Every one of you has the power to be a quality control specialist. Every one of you has the expertise to recognize when something isn't right. The question is, will you have the courage to speak up?" The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Industry leaders approached her afterward with questions about implementing her methods in their own organizations. Orders for her training programs flooded in from companies that wanted to create their own culture of empowerment. "The key," she told them, "is remembering that expertise comes from experience, not from titles. The people who handle your products every day often know more about them than anyone else in your organization." As she left the conference, Haley reflected on how far she'd come. The shy girl who'd once been afraid to speak up had become a voice for workers everywhere. But she'd never forgotten the lesson that started it all. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is trust your instincts and refuse to let something wrong happen on your watch. Her phone buzzed with a text from Earl. "Watched your speech online. Your father would be proud. You found your voice without losing your heart." Haley smiled, thinking of her father's words about courage and caring. The shy girl from Kentucky had indeed found her voice, and in doing so, she'd shown the world that courage comes in many forms, sometimes quiet, sometimes unexpected, but always powerful when it's guided by integrity. Sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the quietest voices. In a world that often overlooks the wisdom of those who do the work, Haley's story reminds us that courage isn't about being loud, it's about being right.